Okay, we're going to begin. Good evening, everyone. Feliz Cinco de Mayo. I graduated from Duke's Economics Masters in 2008, and Duke and Durham are very close to my heart. I am currently a research scientist at the New York Academy of Medicine and an assistant professor of health economics at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. And a lot of my current research deals with addressing health disparities. So I'm very much interested in hearing from tonight's panel on whether and how the Hispanic and Latino community could harness efforts and be more civically engaged. So just to remind you, tonight's event is being recorded, so we should all be in our best behavior. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Amanda Paredes, a member of the Duke University Hispanic Latino Alumni Association, and a very active and crucial member of Duke New York. And I'd also like to introduce our very own Paul Lagunes, board member of the Duke University Hispanic and Latino Association, and assistant professor here at SIPA. So, welcome.
Hi, everyone. So I'd like to welcome you all to Columbia University, and in particular to my school, the School of International and Public Affairs. This school, I believe, does strive to welcome a diversity of voices so that we can engage important policy-relevant issues. And that's what this event is about today. So thank you to my school for giving the space to us for this event. Space, as you know, in New York is very limited, so it's a high value. I also want to thank the Urban and Social Policy Concentration for co-sponsoring this event. I would like to thank in particular Professor Esther Fuchs, Kevin Gulley, Joanne Crawford, Jesse Gale, Urbano Garza, and the AV team, including Edwin back there, Sean, Steve. They made this event possible on the logistical side. So on my behalf, I'd like to thank them.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm so excited for this doula event, and we hope to bring you more programming going forward. I would especially like to thank Sterling Wilder from the DAA, Nelson Belito of Doula, and our regional coordinator, Erica Gavin, for their support in bringing this panel to fruition. For those of you that don't know, Doula is the Duke University Latino Hispanic Alumni Association, and we strive to whose objectives include promoting and providing communication and services for the Duke Hispanic community and its alumni. Doula is an affinity group of Duke New York, a regional group in New York whose presence in the tri-state area plans a wide range of programming for all alumni. New things coming up include a Table 6, a networking initiative, Network Games, and a night watching one of the hottest new shows on Broadway, Hamilton, featuring an exclusive talkback with the cast. Having been on the board of Duke New York for many years, I'm very excited that Doula has found its footing and is bringing its programming to New York. If anyone would like to get involved, feel free to reach out to any of us here tonight about how you can do that. And our programming information can be found at any time at dukenewyork.org. I hope you all enjoy the panel.
And I would also like to take this opportunity to ask Ricardo Canalda to stand up. He's been crucial in organizing this event, and he will be our timekeeper. So if you would give him a hand of applause, we'd appreciate that. Erica Gavin has also been an extraordinary source of help. Jack Boyd, also great help. We appreciate it. And all of you, thank you, and thank you to our panelists.
So I had the pleasure really, to talk to each of one of our panelists over the phone. And I know more or less what they're going to be saying tonight, and I can tell you that each one of them has an incredible wealth of knowledge and expertise, and we have a lot to learn from them tonight. So I'll introduce each of the panelists, and words won't do justice to their wealth of expertise and knowledge in this area. And then they'll have 15 minutes to give their opening remarks and presentations. So I'll begin with Dr. Rodolfo de la Garza. He is the Eaton Professor of Administrative Law and Municipal Science and Professor of International Affairs here at SIPA. Professor de la Garza specializes in ethnic politics with a particular emphasis on Latino public opinion and electoral involvement. His primary interests in public policy include immigration and immigrant settlement and incorporation, and he has edited, co-edited, and co-authored numerous books, including The Future of the Voting Rights Act, Muted Voices, Latinos in the 2000 Election, Sending Money Home, Hispanic Remittances and Community Development, Transforming Mexico-U.S. Relations, and many, many others. Our second panelist, Maria Eugenia Alarcón. Maria Eugenia Alarcón, apologies for that.
That's okay.
Maria is a journalist and producer at NBC News. Maria was born in Colombia and raised part of her life in Spain. She began her career in 1997 as a producer for CBS Telenoticias. And Maria has won numerous awards, including an Emmy Award for her work on NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams. She has produced stories on a wide range of topics, including the Haiti earthquake and the Chilean mining incident. And our third panelist, Tomas Lopez. He's a Duke alumni as well. And Tomas is counsel for the Brennan Center's Democracy Program, where his work focuses on voting rights and elections. Prior to joining the Brennan Center, he was a fellow at the Southern Poverty Law Center's Immigrant Justice Project. There, he worked on litigation and advocacy challenging anti-immigrant legislation in Alabama. He has also served as the Bacon Immigration Law and Policy Program Fellow at the University of Arizona Rogers College of Law, where he supervised workers' rights cases in the law school's immigration clinic and co-authored a report on the impact of Arizona's immigration law on young people. So without further ado, please welcome me, help me in welcoming Dr. Rodolfo de la Garza.
Thank you very much. As a member of the Columbia faculty community, I'm really pleased that we are reaching out and all of us working together. The issue that we are attempting to help you with is one that's vital. That is, as I understand it, your association is trying to help Latino kids do better and go to school. And that's something that ought not to be parochial and limited to one school or another. So I congratulate you for that. But also, I just figured something out, being the insightful, intrepid researcher that I am. I couldn't figure out why you guys came here, and then it struck me. Your basketball coach sent somebody up here to spy on what we do. And so I just want you to know that I understand that. Now, let me begin with the question. My overall question is, does the Latino vote count in presidential elections? Notice I say the vote in elections. It isn't about politics generally. It isn't about protestations. It isn't about civil injustice. It's about voting. Do Latino votes count in presidential elections? There is a lot of ado, much ado, too much, about the importance of the Latino vote. These claims are driven by population size. The assumption is, or the unknowingly unarticulated assumption is, that because Latinos are growing so fast, they're really becoming important. If that were the case, of course, South Africa would have been run by blacks a long time ago. So it's very easy to get caught up in that kind of rhetoric. That kind of rhetoric ignores other factors, the context in which elections are held. For Latinos here, the settlement pattern, not how many are here, but where are they? Are they all in one state? It could happen. Are they engaged in various states given the context? And what are the political institutions that affect them wherever they happen to reside? We don't have a set of institutions. We have states implementing what would be a set of institutions, and the states, as you know, play havoc with that. Now, the population is indeed growing. This is dramatic. There's no other way to say that. If you look forward there from 9.1 in 1970 to 132 in the year 2050. These projections by the Census Bureau always are understated. Mexicans are notorious as, in the old days, they could have made a sexist joke. I'm not allowed to do that anymore, but they are notorious. Now, the other issue that is not looked at, is the settlement patterns. And note here that there are not many states where Latinos are a significant portion of the population. California, the total population of Latinos is 15%, and they are, the red part is their percentage of the state population. So California, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona are really key. Nevada comes in a little bit behind. So there aren't many states where, from a demographic perspective, Latinos can be dominant players. By dominant players, and this is an extreme case, I really mean, and I won't discuss it there, I'll just mention here, where if Latinos, where if the votes are all cast, when you add up who Latinos voted for, the winner could not have won without the Latino vote. In that election, Latinos are the dominant actor. Now, we are accustomed to having coalitions in the United States. People who advocate for Latinos forget about coalitions. We're too close to a period of the Chicano mobilization of the 70s. So we want to talk, so Latino advocates, most of whom are still led by Mexican Americans, still think about being the determinant in elections. And that's really hard to do given these kinds of figures. Now, if you look at this, what you find is that the impact of the Latino vote in these states where there are more than 20% of the population. They have a very low impact in California. There's too many other people in California. So they don't have an impact in statewide elections. They dominate the legislature, but not statewide elections. Statewide elections include governors, senators, and the presidential vote. Okay? New Mexico. There's always so many Mexicans in New Mexico that they gotta be important. They gotta be. That's just a matter of numbers and percents. They gotta be important. Of course, New Mexico's not important, so I'm not sure why we care about it. Then in Texas and Arizona, states with lots of Mexicans primarily, Latinos are irrelevant. In Texas, they have almost no influence in statewide elections. Remember, I'm talking statewide, not congressional elections. Okay? They have almost no impact in Texas. And claims that, well, if they mobilize, they could take the state. Sell them a Brooklyn Bridge the next time you hear somebody claiming that, okay? Arizona, similarly. People thought that in 2012, the governor of Arizona would be a Latino. It was under the most extreme circumstance, highly unlikely, and surely not likely under reasonable circumstances. And then there are 3 swing states. I don't know whether to call these swing or not. In my mind, I think Florida has become a Democratic state. So they're not swinging there. So many Latin Americans are in Florida. Young Cubans have become non-Cuban in the old sense. So and a lot of New York migrants went south. So they are now overwhelming the northern part of Florida. I believe Florida is a Democratic state. I have two colleagues here, I think, who might want to challenge me on that, but they're wrong all the time, so I won't worry about that. Nevada. Nevada is a state that Latinos do well in, although they have a very right-wing governor. Latino, very right-wing governor. But what Nevada also has, and this tells you the other factors, is unions. Wherever you see a combination of unions and Latinos, Latinos do very well. Unions learned that minorities are their friends. It took them almost a century to learn that, but they've learned it. And so they go after Latinos now. And Nevada's Latino influence is linked, it piggybacks on the unions. Colorado is the Oregon of the 70s or 80s. A funny state, interesting people, independent. You don't know what they're going to do next, but looks like they're anti-big cities, they're anti-development, they're tolerant and open to people. Full of yuppies. God, there are just yuppies everywhere in Colorado, right? But yuppies are kind of good for Latinos because they're not anti. They're kind of good for Latinos. So Colorado, which has unions, maybe, I want to believe, I'm less confident that they're a democratic state now, okay? So the point is, there's really only one state that we can find of the major states with populations, from a perspective of percent of population, that where Latinos really have influence, and that's in New Mexico, which is among the least important states in the Union. If you're getting a picture that I'm going to paint a dismal painting here, you're probably right. Now, settlement populations. You have limited increases in Latino influence despite huge population growth. In time, that population growth is going to pay off. How? A lot of immigrants will naturalize, so you've got a pool of new citizens, and yet Latinos are young. There's about 1 million more Latinos reaching 18 every year. They're probably going to come out and look like their parents, and their parents vote overwhelmingly Democratic. In New York, in Illinois, in New Jersey, those are states. New Jersey may be a little weird now, but New Jersey, Illinois, and these states are dominated by Democrats. They don't need Latinos to win those states. If you've ever, those of you from New York, go into the barrios during an election. There's no election. There isn't an election. They don't care if you vote or not. They've got it anyway. What they don't, I've never seen explained well, is how the Democrats have been snookered in the Senate by Republicans. I've never quite fully understood that. But except for that anomaly, Latinos are irrelevant in the state of New York during elections because Democrats always win. They never even used, until very recently, they never even asked Latinos to vote. Okay? So Latinos are neither necessary nor sufficient for the Democrats to turn to Latinos, and these are all Democratic states. Okay? Now, that's a scenario. That paints a very modest picture. It's hard for Latinos to be very important. Well, what if they were able to influence elections? What do they want? And this is where things really get interesting. Huntington created a terrible problem when he suggested that Latinos were undermining America. He says that in one book and then hints at it strongly in several others. And in his last book, Who Are We? He really says that these immigrants just can't be American. They're not Western European and don't have the work ethic. Obviously didn't see how migrants work, but that was his judgment. On major national policy issues on the public agenda in the 2007, and it's very hard to get good data that allow us to do this, Latinos and Anglos, or Latinos and non-Latinos, differed on 5 of 6 general policies. On 5 of 6, Latinos were much more likely, on a key issue, to support equal funding of all schools. And no matter where they are, no matter what their age was, no matter what their income was, they overwhelmingly supported. If you're in Texas, the last thing you want is equal funding of all schools, because your schools are going to lose money, and they're still in court. And so many states are like that. If you run a district-based school system, you don't want to share your money, if you're affluent, with them who are poor. 20% fewer Latinos in the general public. 1 minute. Let me see if I can move real fast here to the punchline. Latinos didn't support the Iraq War. They were 20% lower than Anglos regarding the war. But now, let me go to another point that I think is really vital. One of the things that really distinguishes Latinos, there are two areas where Latinos are very distinct from the general population. One is on what I would call ethnic policies, policies that distinctly affect them. Latinos, 85% of all Latinos, even though they don't think immigration is a major issue, it's often not the first 4 issues that they raise, they think that you should not charge immigrants more than, or as if they were out-of-state students. It's a major push. 91% of Latinos think that immigrants strengthen the U.S. 50% of Latinos, as opposed to 65% of others, think that after 1 year, all your classes should be in English. Think about the images people have about bilingual education. Latinos aren't for bilingual education. They want the kids to learn English. Okay? 46% of Latinos want amnesty immediately. Now, rather than show you these are the point of those charts is that it goes on no matter one. But this is the one that is shocking. And then with this, I'll bring it as quickly, very close to the end. Latinos, unlike Americans, other Americans, I should say, support a big state. They support expanded welfare. They believe in government-funded health care. They believe that if you're working poor, the government should supplement your income. They believe that if you try to get a job and you can't, the government should give you a guaranteed income. And we're talking about support at about the 85 to 90+%. And it doesn't matter how long you've been in this country. It doesn't matter, that is, recent arrival or 4th generation. It doesn't matter how much income you make. Latinos believe in a social network. I like to call this my Latinos are Swedes paper. Okay? That's what they're advocating. As you well know, the Republican Party would rather die than do this. And Democrats are afraid of Elizabeth Warren because she might push the same ideas. So Latinos are off kilter. Latinos, if they became important electorally, would move the spectrum this way. If they become important, they are going to change the American policy arena. They'll have enough influence by being important to move everybody left. They're already moving some Republicans toward the center. They are sitting right next to Elizabeth Warren. They're on the left. So, the point then, to bring it all together, Latinos are not influential in the national elections. If no Latino had voted in 2012 and everything else stayed the same, Obama still would have won. Think about that. If Obama had gotten not one Latino vote, he still would have won. It's hard to make the claim that Latinos are really important when it doesn't matter if you vote, right? So the claim, the rhetorical claim, it needs to be adjusted to the empirical reality. The question facing Latinos and the Democratic Party is, can Hillary mobilize at the same rate as Obama? The question facing Republicans, can they get enough Latinos to go beyond 35% minority vote? If they can get above 35%, I will go on the limb and predict they will win the election. Because they're going to swing enough. 35% of Latinos are like a lot of centrist Anglos. When you get into that realm of Latinos, they look like centrist Anglos. Moderate moderate rightists, centrists, right-wing Democrats. If the Democrats lose enough Latinos so Republicans get 35%, they can win this election. Can that happen? Yeah, it can happen. We could talk about that maybe in the question and answer period, but until then, don't go buying any bridges from people who are advocating the power of the Latino vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. De La Garza. So now Maria is going to be following up with the position of the media.
Great.
So, Maria.
Well, he's going to kill me because I'm actually going to be a little more positive
A little
than
more
he is
positive.
on it.
That would be good
But,
to lighten up the mood.
But obviously, as I said, I've been in journalism for 18 years, and if I know one thing is that image is important, and what, the images that we see are very important. And I think one thing that the numbers I know don't show, but that the images show and what we read shows is that Latinos do matter, at least in the articles and what we're seeing with the candidates. I covered the election in 2004, and I followed Howard Dean, and it mattered that he had thousands of kids following him. We did stories on it. It mattered that he had all these people following him. So when it comes to elections, I do think that numbers on an image perspective matter, right? The way that we look at it. I know that obviously anyone who knows the Electoral College is really the one that decides our president and our vice president. But to the rest of the world, the Latino vote has been something that everyone's talking about. You do a Google search right now, and you'll find at least 8 million mentions of the Latino vote in 2016. Today alone, Hillary Clinton was out in Las Vegas, trying to get the Latino vote. Not only that, Jeb Bush came out with a Cinco de Mayo video in Spanish saying, touting his Mexican ties, and he's not even a candidate for that he hasn't even announced, yet he's already doing it. All the candidates are already doing it. So if it doesn't matter, at least in an image perspective, then why are they doing it? They're doing it because I think in the end, in the long term, it does matter. It does matter that Latinos vote. And I tell you what, for me, that what really matters is these numbers are really startling. And I think you mentioned one of them already, which is, for me, a little over 12 million Latinos voted this past president election. Another 11 million could have voted, but didn't, according to Latino decisions. And that's a shame. That's a true shame. You're talking about almost half, right? Another number that I think is interesting, by 2016, 28 million Latinos will be eligible to vote. The new voters are Latino millennials, and I think that's where we need to put our money, right? That's what I think it will count for the long term. What I think will be one of the most important blocks in this upcoming election on image. I know numbers, but on image, I think they're gonna try to, the GOP as well as the Democrats are going to try so hard to get their support. As we say, every 30 seconds, a Latino turns 18 years old. That's almost 1 million projected just to turn 18 this year. 70% have the right to vote, but only about 26 voted in 2012. The problem is, as you know, young people, they just don't vote. They don't go to vote like the baby boomers do, right? If you're older, you're more willing to spend some time, go to vote if you have the time to go. But, young people, they just don't care. It's not part of the reality. And what I say is that we need to make it part of the reality. We need to make sure that they go and vote. We must change that if we want the Latino vote to matter. And since the average age of Latinos is 27, if we teach them to vote now, we're going to have a lifetime of voting habit, and then we'll go to the polls. I know it's the hardest job in the world. Trying to get young people to be civically engaged and vote is really one of the hardest things I think that, I'm sure you can talk about it, can do. And I think it's ironic that dreamers, right, those who can't vote, those who don't have a voice in the United States have been really the ones to stand up and be more politically involved than anyone else. My hope is that millennials see their example and are inspired by these young people and come out to vote in 2016 and convince their parents to vote. Because another problem we have is that older Latinos, especially those who are not, U.S. born, they don't vote. And we all know the reasons, right? Surveys show that Latinos often don't like the candidates that are presented, right? They rather not vote, period. It's hard for them to take off work. You have jobs, you have bosses. It's obviously, we know there's voter suppression in some states. That's also been an issue. And simply, some people just don't feel they can make a difference by voting. And I disagree. I think numbers do matter. No candidate will be perfect, right? Both parties will undoubtedly pander to Hispanics, like they did today, make mistakes when reaching out, and even fail to really connect with Hispanic voters. But it's our responsibility really to make sure that we matter. We need to make sure that we matter and send the message out that there's no path to the White House without our vote, without our support. And that's what we need to make sure. As a journalist, I can tell you that, if you don't see a large turnout in a voter registration event of Latinos, there's no story there. But if you see thousands going out in the streets in the support of a cause, there's going to be a story. We're going to do a story about it. And our story is going to reach millions of people. And then there will be the perception that we matter. And I think unfortunately, that's what really counts. We all know it. We've all been in the workplace where sometimes that guy who is perceived to be better gets the job, right? Even though you're working really hard. Where I claim that this is the same thing. We need to make sure we perceive our vote as the one that really matters. And that's why I think that efforts by, LULAC, Mi Familia, Voto Latino, as well as outlets, Rock the Vote, all trying to reach the millennials, because they know that by inspiring and motivating Latino millennials to vote, this will make a huge difference in the future. Look, I don't care who I'm a journalist. I don't care who they vote for as long as they vote. I mean, that's the bottom line for me. And I know they're doing it in the space that's more comfortable. Like the days of going to campaigns and flipping pancakes is over, right? That's not how we're going to reach millennials. We're going to reach millennials through tweets, texts, events with famous, stars. That's what they want. That's what we got to give them. That's how we need to galvanize Latinos that way. And that's, after all, what do you think Jeb Bush is trying to get people on his side? Right? I mean, you've all read those articles. He's trying to get people to come to his camp because he knows that in the end, Latino millennials really do matter.
So I want to tail off of both those remarks and also provide a little more of the legal context. My name is Tomas Lopez. I'm a Latino millennial. apparently. I have Snapchat on my phone. I actually deleted Twitter because it's over. It's probably not over, but I'm over it. And I'm also a Duke graduate, and so I also want to kind of give a shout to all the Duke people that are here and to everybody who kind of put this event together, Paul and Ricardo and Amanda and everybody, and Norma and everybody else who's been involved in this, Erica. It's really great to be here. Professor De La Garza mentioned New York. I was born and raised here. I was born and raised in the Bronx. My parents from Puerto Rico, they came here as young people, and as he mentioned in his presentation, like many New Yorkers, they moved to Florida, where, like you just mentioned, they don't vote. So the things that you've mentioned, I think, speak to the experiences of real people. And I think what I want to try to do for the next couple of minutes is provide a legal context for what we're talking about. So Professor De La Garza mentioned, where Latinos are going and how they see the world. And Maria just spoke about what we're seeing in the media and the young people and how we connect with them. But one important thing to understand is that, and I didn't entirely realize this before I got into voting rights work, is that voting and elections is governed by a complicated and often contentious body of law. Before I got into this, I worked for a couple of years on immigrants' rights issues, first in Arizona and then in Alabama. And what drew me to the voting space was a feeling that I think, like a lot of the sort of folks here have been talking about, ultimately, if you want something, you need the votes to make it happen, that votes are the center of influence. And one point I think one way in which I might kind of depart a little bit from both the other panelists, and not depart, but sort of mention, is that the whole world is not entirely presidential elections. I think it's important to talk about what happens at your state level, what happens locally, what happens in your neighborhoods. This is where government meets the people. That's especially important in the election law context, because while there are some things that are federally set under election law, like certain protections that exist under the Voting Rights Act and similar laws, American election law is actually a patchwork. Voter registration deadline is different in New York, it's different in California, it's different in Michigan, it's different in Florida. What your ballot looks like is different in New York County, where we are, than it is in Dutchess County, than it is in Buffalo. Our election laws are very much governed by what happens locally, and when we talk about election laws, we talk about protections and we talk about barriers. When we talk about protections, we have a few things that come to mind, but the number one thing that probably people talk about, and I know that's something that Professor De La Garza has done a lot of writing about, is the Voting Rights Act. The VRA was passed 50 years ago. This is a law that prevents discrimination in voting, and it's something that's important because you probably see in the headlines some things about litigation concerning the right to vote. That often happens under the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act was hobbled in some ways a couple of years ago by a Supreme Court decision that took away a part of the law that provided that certain jurisdictions with a history of discriminatory voting practices had to have their new voting procedures cleared before they could implement them. And in the last couple of years since we've seen that provision of law go away, at least for now, we have seen a wave of litigation and a wave of conflicts over possible restrictions on the right to vote. The protections of the Voting Rights Act are still there. There are still lawsuits you can bring under the law. It is still illegal to discriminate in voting, but the protections are not quite as robust as they used to be. The second thing I want to talk about are barriers. And when we talk about barriers, we have to talk about states. Over the past 5 years or so, we have seen a fairly substantial wave of what we would categorize at the Brennan Center of restrictive voting laws, laws that make it more difficult for people to vote. And what we mean when we talk about that is that we are talking about laws that reduce the availability of early voting. This is the ability in many states, not here in New York, but in many states where you can vote before Election Day, something that's proven to be popular with voters, and particularly voters from certain ethnic groups. We talk about laws that provide strict photo identification in order to vote. And when we talk about that, we don't necessarily mean taking away entirely the ability for people to have to prove who they say they are, but what we talk about is having a really strict itemized list of things that you have to bring with you in order to vote. We're part of litigation right now in the state of Texas over a strict photo ID law that provides that you could use your gun permit at the polling place, but not your student ID. The federal court in that case accepted a finding that over 600,000 registered voters in Texas, that's registered voters, do not have the kind of ID that is required under that law. And that's not people who are eligible to vote. That's not people who are not on the rolls, that we'd like to get on the rolls, that we'd like to show up at the voter registration drive. These are people who are registered to vote that the court has accepted can't. And so there are barriers. There are other kinds of barriers as well, barriers that aren't as new. Some of my work at the Brennan Center, which I should have mentioned earlier, is a law and policy institute that focuses on issues of democracy and justice and is a part of the NYU Law School. Some of my work involves felony disenfranchisement laws. There are around 4 million people in the United States who have a criminal conviction somewhere in their past and cannot vote because of that criminal conviction. And in many cases, despite of the fact that they are no longer in prison. In New York, there are 40,000 people no longer in prison who are unable to vote. And a lot of these laws are very old. Some of them go back to the founding of the Republic, and some of them have explicitly racist Jim Crow origins, going back to the 19th century. States like Virginia, where it was mentioned in the Constitutional Convention where it was put into place, and states like New York, where it was also mentioned when it was put into place that putting in a law to keep people from voting with a felony conviction was something that could reduce African American voting power. I think there's been a lot of attention recently in general on the criminal justice system and how it impacts communities of color, and that certainly includes Latino communities in many places. And I urge folks here to think about the ways in which the accessibility to the right to vote intersects a lot of these issues. The third thing I want to do before kind of kicking it back to Norma and eventually to all of you is to crystallize where we are right now. We have litigation going on in several states where there are attempts to make voting more difficult. We also have these old, long-standing laws that also make it more difficult for people to vote. But we also have real progress that's possible that can cut across partisan boundaries, that can make voting more accessible to people. We are seeing bills to make online voter registration available passing throughout the country. We are seeing a bill that passed just a few months ago in Oregon that is making it so that people are registered to vote when they sign up for a driver's license, and they can opt out later, but once they go get that driver's license, they're registered to vote. We have around 50 million Americans and a lot of Latinos, 11 million in the last election, who are eligible to vote but not even registered. There are things that we can do that are not necessarily controversial that can bring people onto the voting rolls and bring participation to them. We think the best democracy is one where eligible citizens get to participate. And we want to be able to do, when we talk about the influence of the Latino vote, we have to talk about actually creating and empowering more Latino voters through the law, just like we empower all of the eligible voters that we have. And so I would urge folks to look into those reforms, to modernize our voter registration systems, to make voter registration more available, to make it so that people are actually able to be a part of the democracy. You talk about engaging young people. We talk about how people don't necessarily feel like they're a part of it. My parents say, I asked my parents why, don't they vote? And a lot of it is about a lack of confidence in leadership. I think one step that we can take, and I hope that the conversation can guide us there, is looking at the positive ways in which we can use the law to empower and create more voters.
Thank you, Tomas. And before opening the floor for questions from the audience, I'd like to start with one, myself. So I'd like to dig a little deeper in something that Maria mentioned during her presentation and hear from all of our panelists. So one of the things that Maria mentioned was that we're basically banking on second and third generation Hispanics to increase their civic engagement and participation in vote. For a lot of them, their parents didn't vote. Their parents do not vote at the moment either. And so what can we do, or is it something being done right now to promote their engagement? There's some imagining a learning curve in civic participation. And are we doing anything, or is there anything in place to promote this civic engagement and civic education for Latinos?
I mean, I'll start by saying, obviously, only 6 out of 10 Latino voters were born in the U.S., but 75 of them, American-born Hispanics, were registered to vote in 2012. So I think there is hope. I find there's hope. And there's hope. But I think we have to do more. I mean, certainly, you know, I think money talks, right? So I think their groups need more funding to be able to draw more Latinos. I think many studies show that campaigns have actually been terrible at reaching out to Latinos. They spend very little money in reaching out. I think like the day of, you know, days before the election, only like 20% or 30% of Latinos are being reached by phone or any other means, which means that campaigns, even though they make big speeches about Latinos, they're not spending as much time on the grassroots level trying to get people out to vote, and that's what they really need to do. Obviously, Obama did a better job at trying to galvanize the young vote. By being highly interactive on the internet and emailings and all that. So he was definitely more modern, let's just say, than the Romney campaign was. So he's able to draw more young people, but I think we have to do more. I think we have to support these groups that are out there. You know, like I said, Mi Familia, LULAC, Voto Latino is doing amazing job, because they know that in the end, young people are going to come out to those events that also interest them. I mean, so have I'm sorry, but have Pitbull come out and have the big stars come out, and whether it's Romeo Santos, whether it's like whoever, just bring them out, make sure that they come out. And have these big events and have registration booths to have them and vote. I think do whatever you need to do to have them come out and vote, and realize how important it is. It's not just for them; it's for their parents. It's for their future. I think that we have a hard time making sure young people understand that if they don't take action now, they'll pay for it later. So. I'm a mom, so of course I'm going to say that now. but you know what I mean? Like, I think we have to do more. We have to give more funding to these groups. And the campaigns have to do better. I don't think it's just from these groups. Campaigns have to do better. They haven't done a good job in reaching Hispanics. They have to do better, both Democrats and Republicans.
Dr. Lagarza?
Well, it's, maybe I've been doing this too long. Everything you said is right. The problem is getting it done. I began working with voting rights in the 70s, engaged as an expert in voting rights cases across Texas, Colorado, Illinois, Florida, a lot of places. And it was always the same issue. Now, the dilemma becomes overcoming the lethargy that nobody's ever figured out how to do it. But more than not figuring how to do it, campaign strategies are premised on efficient use of resources. They can now tell you who's the most likely to vote. Don't waste your money chasing the third most likely to vote. Spend it all, most of it, on the first. then spend a whole bunch on the second, a little bit maybe on the third. Forget the fourth and fifth. Well, you know who the fourth and fifth is? It's the Mexican 65 years old who's never voted. And it's the Mexican kid, Mexican-American kid, who's never voted. And that is strategic and it's effective. How do you get parties to invest in a high-risk, expensive strategy to turn out voters that have individuals who have never shown an interest in voting? How do you do that? It's a lot of money. You're the candidate. You say, look, Rudy, I got $5 million. What you're talking about is going to cost $4.8 million. And I'm going to get 20,000 votes. For $500,000, I'm going to get 80,000 votes over there. Why should I do what you're saying?
Well, I don't know, but Hillary...
But let me add, the image that you talked about is what we hear in the rhetoric of how important Latinos are. Everybody talks about Latinos. And then they lay out a plan of the key states. How many Latinos are vital in Ohio? How many? None. How about Indiana? Very few. How about Iowa? How about Nebraska? So the Republicans, the Democrats are going to put no money in there.
No, not true. Only in the swing states.
What, but how many swing states are there? I just in my analysis, there's maybe 3 of the big states, maybe 3, and I'm not sure all 3. So as you approach the election, you've got 10 swing states. Then the Democrats say, don't put any more money there because we've got it, or don't put any more money there because they've got it. So you ignore a place that has a lot of Latinos for one or the other reason, but you ignore it. So there's only a few states that one party or the other doesn't think it's going to win relatively easily.
Well, that would be for, from the parties, right? So what about
Those are the candidates.
Those are the candidates.
The candidates could be independent of the party.
Sure, but that would fall upon sort of political reasons to promote civic engagement or not. I'd be interested to hear if Tomas has
Sorry,
anything
just
to
to interrupt
say.
for a second. I'm going to place the microphone here for other people who have questions. Line up and then take the microphone when it's your turn. Please ask a question, not so much pose a comment. Thank you.
Well, I was going to
Running
say,
out of time here, but
I was
please.
going to say from a law and policy perspective, I think there are things that, again, can be done that will engage more voters, again, of all kinds, including and maybe especially Latino voters. You know, one of the things that a lot of the groups that work on voting rights do is every election day, we help staff these phone lines where people who have issues on election day can call in and, you know, we report it and we tabulate it and we figure out, you know, what are the most common issues that people have. And we're doing this all over the country. And last election day, manned the call center in Midtown. You can see the Citigroup Center building from here. And that's, you know, where we were. And we were taking calls from various states. Top things that people, one of the top things that people call about is, am I registered to vote? Or, I moved. Can I vote in my new place or do I have to go to my old place? One thing that we can do is we can make sure that people's voter registration moves with them so that they know where they're supposed to go. Another thing we can do, am I registered to vote? Well, it should be that you should, you know, we believe that people should be able to go and register to vote at the polling place. Same day registration. You know, we also think that voting should be available on the weekend. It should be available to early so that you can actually work around somebody's busy schedule. You know, I talked about states that are that are passed laws in ways large and small that make voting more difficult. The way of 21 states between 2010 and 2014. And again, in big ways and in small ways. And one thing that's worth noting, you know, as part of this conversation, and I say this not to say that, you know, it's a causation issue, but it's a real thing. Of the 12 states that had the highest Latino population growth from 2000 to 2010, 9 of those states passed laws that made it more difficult to vote in that 4-year period. And so we talk about, you know, I think we should have this conversation about what campaigns do, what the media does. But there are things that the public can do as part of the political process that can make, that can make voting more accessible, that can make our election system more open, that I think will help with this whole process.
That's great. So no questions from the audience?
Hi, thanks all of you for your very insightful comments today. I just wanted to pick up on this issue of getting voter turnout higher, especially from the Latino and the millennial community. Speaking as a millennial myself, I can say that a lot of us are truly quite disenfranchised with the political system in the country, and that is sometimes one of the big reasons why we don't turn out and vote as much as we should. With regards to the Latino issue, you've talked a lot about the pull factors, the things that the campaigns can do to get people voting for them and get them into the booths. But there's always a corresponding push factor, I feel. And what are the issues that you feel will really kind of mobilize, like what has to happen for them to kind of get up out of their house, go and say, no, this year I'm voting, no question about it. Kind of the other side with the pull them in, but how do you get them out in the first place? Thanks.
Well, I mean, I think education's key, right? Obviously, getting out the word out, education's key to make sure that they do go out to vote. I think that immigration has been, even though it's not the top issue, I think everybody knows that Latinos care more about education, health, and the economy, right? Those are the top three issues that Latinos care about. But I do think that even those Latinos who are not directly affected by immigration know somebody who is. So I certainly think that immigration has been somewhat, though not as much as it should have been, a factor in getting young people, to really, galvanized and to be more politically active. But I do think that, the way I look at it is it starts young. I think we should start having more conversations with the younger the kids, the better, when they start to understand how important it is. I think that if you start early, that you'll be better, you'll be better off in the long term. I mean, I know maybe I'm just speaking, obviously I'm not down there, I don't have 20 years of experiences, or 30, 40, 40. I'm giving him making him younger. Maybe he's closer to the millennial. but obviously I do think that if we start early in schools and, we teach them why it's important, and just not just for Latino kids, for all kids. We need to teach young people why it's important to be involved. Look, I became a citizen in 2004, actually, and I've never not imagined not voting. I worked too hard to become a citizen, which the way I did on my own, without a lawyer. To be able to not have that I don't know, that honor, really, and to say, look, maybe this isn't a way of thinking about it, but if you don't vote, don't complain, is the way I look at it. Like, if you don't get involved, then I'm sorry. Then it's, you can complain all you want about what's going on in your life, but you didn't take part in making your future happen. So look, Latinos are well known we're very well known for it, being very entrepreneurial and solving our own problems. So we need to take that attitude and put it into, our political power and own it and take the reins. Don't wait for somebody else to bring you, to the polls. We need to take our own, take responsibility for our own. And I think we need to motivate each other. And I think we need to do it early. And I know you're right, campaigns don't spend a lot of money per se on young people, but they also have made a lot of, they've done a lot of things to make sure that they do reach Hispanics. Hillary, when she announced, she did it in English and Spanish, so if she didn't care, she wouldn't have done it in two languages. That's all I'm saying.
There's something that I've witnessed that I think goes to your point, and it's a new phenomenon for me to think about it. And I really believe it works. And it's come back. When I was early in my life, I used to work with the Southwest Voter Project. I used to be very close friends with Willie Velasquez, who in my judgment is the most important Mexican-American political leader in the history of this nation. More important politically than Cesar Chavez, in my judgment, okay? Now, what we used to do, partly with Willie, we'd go on these crazy 6 a.m. television shows. Nobody watches it, 6 a.m. television, except it was the only time the Mexicans had a TV show. So we'd go down And then we would go into Spanish and did all kinds of illegal things in Spanish because we knew nobody was listening who cared about it. And we'd say, hay que votar por ese, va a fregar. And so we used to laugh, but we used to do that all the time. Then I stopped, we moved on. And now, what's his name? The guy for the major Latinos, the Cuban American who runs. Rubio. No, not the candidate. The news. Ramos. Ramos wrote this is to locate him so that you know how honest the following statement will be. Ramos wrote a book that if my graduate student had written it, I'd have flunked him. And it was magnificent. Latinos will win the 2004 election. We are going to win that election, and I'm going to show you how. And the damn guy didn't know anything to talk about. He was so wrong, it was embarrassing. Now, he's doing what we used to do. What he's doing is he's going into Spanish every moment and hammering on immigration to the point that there's a quote by a Republican, "Don't get Jorge mad at you." Think about that. When the Republican Party leadership says, be careful, man, if he burns you, you're dead because he's going to go into Spanish and you're dead. Most Latinos, very few Latinos don't understand Spanish. A lot of them don't speak it. But very few are not at least passive bilinguals. Okay? And he is pushing a line that the Anglo media does not push. He's not neutral in saying, oh, well, the Italians built great highways. Doesn't matter how many people they killed. Their trains ran on time. That's what stands for neutrality in our media right now. I got to say both sides. Jorge doesn't tell you both sides. Jorge tells you one side. And he hits, and he hits, and he hits over and over again. I believe that Jorge might be, and I don't notice, remember what I said first, I think if Latinos get mobilized, he should get much of that credit if he's actually doing what I'm pretty sure he's doing. He is violating campaign laws, however subtly, in Spanish, on television, so every Latino knows what he's saying. Cuidado con esos cabrones. That's what he's telling them.
That's very interesting, Professor De La Garza. In the interest of time, please go ahead with the next question.
Yes, thank you. In that very, very nice discursive remarks that you were making, I think you had mentioned the word Republican. It was said in discussion today that, well, I do take notes as a Dookie, yes. The Latino vote was neither necessary nor sufficient for a Democratic victory, but it might in fact be so for a Republican victory. It certainly happened here in New York in '94 and in '98 when you had Badillo as well as Fernando Ferrer encouraging people to vote for Giuliani. And it may very well have happened in New Jersey recently with the current Republican governor. So my question really would be, what would the Republican Party need to do to get further Latino support? Because there it might make a difference. Please.
Remember my point, if Republicans get more than 35%, I believe they can win the election. So they don't have to win them. Democrats must win big on Latinos. Republicans don't have to win the Latino vote. They just have to increase. I mean, what did Romney get? 27%?
27.
I mean, cripe, your grandmother get 27%. So you want to raise it. And Jeb Bush can do that. I believe. I don't think Mark Rubio can do that. Because, a little known secret, as I'm sure you know, most Latinos don't like Cubans. And it's going to come out. It's going to come out right up front. If you live in this world, how many Cubans are there in here? One. I told somebody the other day, or a little while ago, this is the only place I've been in the last 15 years where there are established, professional, relatively young Latinos that isn't almost dominated by Cubans. My wife's the only one, and I had to drag her over here.
I don't like Cubans.
Okay, so,
Well, the Koch brothers are doing some serious outreach to the Hispanic community as we speak. They're as you know, they have a huge campaign. So it's not that the Republicans are not trying, definitely, to get to the 35%. I think they're doing a more grassroots, which I think what was really lacking with Romney as well. But we'll see what they do moving forward. I do think that because Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz are Cuban Americans or Latino, I don't think that's going to do anything for the West, for
remember what I
Latinos in the
said
West.
about the policy priorities of Latinos. Republicans cannot run on those policy priorities. Republicans cannot say to Latinos, we want a big government health program. And we want to guarantee the income of Hispanics who can't get a job. They can't say that. That's what Latinos want. What are they going to do?
Why?
Yeah, well, that's possible.
I'll just quote, I know there's some research by, Matt Segura, as you know, and Matt Barreto, that from Latino Decisions. I know they've written a book about how they feel that even though Republicans and conservatives feel that they can reach out to the Latino vote, essentially a lot of the beliefs that Latinos have, like a bigger government, kind of makes it like a not so cohesive relationship. So, but I mean, there is hope within we've all read within the Republican Party that they will reach those Latinos who have more conservative views or who are more religious, who evangelists are getting in the game, as you know, and trying to make sure from the pulpit, they preach their own politics. So there is definitely an effort starting to be an effort from the Republican Party. Obviously, we all know that in the last election, that effort was lackluster. When it came to Latinos, we'll see what happens this time. I think the game's on, right? We'll see what happens.
So, the next question.
Okay, I wanted to go back to the question about getting more people to vote. I come from an advertising background, so to me that sounds like a communications problem, that we're not really understanding what the drivers are to get people to go out to vote. And I'm wondering if there are legal restrictions. For example, we just did a campaign about HIV awareness, and a lot of young people, the incidence going up, and they're not getting tested. And so what we did is a campaign where we did concerts, and the only way you could go to the concert is if you got tested, and then you could get into the concert. So can we do more innovative ways of getting people incentives to get them to go out to vote, besides traditional, education outreach that seems kind of old school?
I'm personally hoping that Romeo Santos gets involved. I'm just kidding. I don't know if any of you know, but he's like the hottest Latino star in the U.S. And he sold out Yankee Stadium twice in a row, which is the first for any Latino. And I'm joking, but I'm not joking. I think that is sort of what you have to do nowadays. The same way that when you were in college, you bring, making sure there's food for an event, it makes a sure way that people will show up. Well, it's the same thing, I think, when it comes to having events for young people. I think you have to have things that are interesting to them, whether it's a concert, whether it's a, events of, sports events with stars. I mean, everybody knows that, young people react, they're a culture of celebrity, selfie celebrity. I'm sorry, I know you're a millennial, but, that's what they respond to. So overall, that's what they respond to. So I think we have to do that in order to drive them out, like in advertising. Look, I do stories every day, right? My stories, I make a mini as I call, a mini movie every day on different issues. And I know that, an image, a word, a soundbite makes a huge difference. And that's what we need to focus. That's why I believe that image is important, and we need to make sure we have the right package to provide, to basically draw in the millennials.
I do think, in speaking not necessarily, wearing my institutional hat, but purely personally as somebody who's worked on these issues, one of the big challenges is that people really only pay attention to voting when there's a big election. So, it's a cyclical thing. That's how we end up with the situations where people call into election protection and they say, am I registered to vote? Like, it's not it's not something that is a constant, that is in a constant dialogue. We're probably relatively unusual for being, where we are in May of 2015, 18 months before a presidential election, having this conversation. There will be a lot more of these conversations happening a year from now, and even more 15, 16 months from now. In terms of, you asked, in terms of the law, I can't speak specifically to advertising laws and whatnot, but I will say that one of the things that early voting in particular can facilitate is kind of more accessibility, through events like that. One of the reasons why early voting is particularly popular is through, especially weekend early voting, is through so-called Souls to the Polls events, where people will go as a church congregation and kind of go vote together. And that's something that's popular and that, gets people involved. And, and so the loss of early voting opportunities in certain places, like in North Carolina, is also the loss of certain outreach opportunities like that. Most voter outreach is obviously focused on voter registration as opposed to voting, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But that was kind of one thing that was well-known and effective, and, kind of was hobbled by the reduction in early voting in that state.
We did, and sir, your question is really vital, and our attorney friend might be able to answer. For about 20 years ago, I went to foundation after foundation with a proposal, somewhat like you're saying, look, if we organized an event with, I was in Texas at the time, we'll get all the ranchero groups that everybody loves, and they're going to play, and they're going to be in an arena, maybe in San Antonio at the Hemisphere Park. And we said, and the only ticket, everything is free. Food is free, beer is free. I mean, the only ticket of admission is a registration card, or if it's on after, something like that. And I was told you can't do that because American law will interpret that, at least that was the rule, as linking, paying for votes. And
You're not picking a candidate, right?
no, but just doing it neutrally, I tried that route, and I got just beaten down over and again, so I just gave it up. But that would seem to make sense, right? But my colleague here and his colleagues stopped it.
Yeah.
No, I know you didn't.
Yeah, I was like, I was in grade school. I will say that I concede I'm not familiar with that sort of aspect of voter registration law. I mean, it's something that, we'd have to look into to really kind of give you the right answer. There are limitations on the activities of voter registration organizations. And certainly, there are things, and actually the activities of voter registration organizations are things that are sometimes targets for increased scrutiny. There was recently a kind of political dust-up last year in Arizona over kind of the process that all kinds of voter registration groups use in Arizona to drop off ballots that are delivered by mail and drop them off all in person. And this briefly became a thing where it was like, these people are stuffing the ballot, before, it came out that, this is something that everyone does and is pretty standard.
That's great. Next question.
So I have a question, but I'd like to add that there's really a lack of cultural understanding in America. And so welcoming people with food and drink and conviviality is something that would be frowned upon. We need to find a way to open up the voting process to including cultural acceptance that would make someone want to come and participate. But so my question is, why do you think we have a dearth of qualified, charismatic leaders? So if people want to rush out and vote, they're likely to overcome lethargy and do that if there's someone for whom they wish to vote. And I'm a strong supporter of Cuba, and I would say viva el Che. And if you have someone who's very energetic and full of intelligence and doing something that people want to follow, they're going to come out and vote. And why don't we have more people who are running for office that people want to vote for, that Latinos want to vote for? And how can we invite more people to enter into that process?
What I was going to say, I think one challenge that exists is the role of money in politics. I think another, not an issue that I work on, but one that my colleagues do is the fact that to run for office costs a lot of money, and that doesn't even include the role of organizations that have no caps on their spending, that have the ability to not have to disclose who gives them money. And so one of the real, I think that's kind of probably one key threshold issue is the cost that's involved and everything that comes with that.
Honestly, I don't really know how to answer that question, except that for me, there's never been a perfect candidate, but I think you just have to choose the least, lesser devil, let's just say, and there's no, and I agree that there's a lack of Latino leaders that have stepped to the forefront, but, African Americans have had the same problem. So I'm sure it has to do with money. I don't have the answer for that, but I know it's a problem we've all had.
Remember, there aren't many whites that are inspiring us either.
Yeah.
A lot of the specific issues that you touched upon seem to be economic in terms of things that Latinos care about, welfare or healthcare or immigration is kind of its own thing. But what's the role or what's the importance of social issues, things like maybe marijuana legalization or gay marriage? How does that potentially play in, not just for candidates, but even for potential ballot initiatives?
The data tell us that if you take years of life, of the percent of your life spent in the U.S., the slope on the conservative scale of those issues goes straight down. The recent Mexican arrival is very anti-abortion, is very much unconcerned about women's rights, is very much a traditional woman. And in the towns where they came from, there was a great price to pay if you weren't that. They get here, and the longer they're here, they go this way. One of the social consequences of that is, we know from studies, using Mexicans again, Mexican women do not want to marry Mexican immigrants. And Mexican men want only to marry Mexican immigrants. Why? Because the man still thinks he can run the house and tell her what to do. And she says, hey, Jack, she's not doing what her husband tells her, and she's going out with her girlfriends. Forget it, baby, I'm not sticking around with you. And so there's a learning curve. Everywhere in the world, as of a few years ago anyway, as education went up, childbirth went down. Everywhere. As you give women options, their behavior changes. That happens for Latin American immigrants, happens for everybody.
No, do you want to?
My question is, going back to the idea, what we were saying, what the panel was saying about Cuban Americans and their political position. I'm wondering if we're being too unforgiving, and if that is a disservice in the following respect. If Latino vote does not count as much as we'd like it to, shouldn't we be seeking coalitions? Shouldn't we be seeking allies, regardless of their current position, trying to move them a little bit toward where Latinos stand. So my question has to do with that. Where do we share common interests with other groups, and how do we engage those groups?
That's why one of the reasons, you talked about Florida and how Florida has become more democratic. Well, one of the things is, as you mentioned, is that young Cuban Americans are becoming more democratic. They're switching parties, basically, so I think that's why I think the young people are really sort of the answer, because I believe they're going to be more unified, perhaps, in what they believe, because, I mean, as we know, one of the biggest problems we have is that Latinos are not monolithic, right? We're very varied, and where we come from all backgrounds and so on, but that's why I do think that, in Florida, Cuban Americans have lost, their monopoly of politics, because their young people have decided to switch sides, and I think that's why the young vote is important, because I think that's where they're born here, they're more American, right? I mean, the Latino millennials are American. They're American, period. They're going to have American values.
I would say, again, not wearing my institutional hat, I think there are issues that are drawing more people together. And I think one thing that's probably in a lot of people's minds right now is criminal justice. There is support across the political spectrum for trying to do something about mass incarceration, for trying to do something about the nature of sentencing. We see this in the voting space for the Republicans who have come out in support of reforming felony disenfranchisement laws in different parts of the country. And so I do think that there are issues where bridges are being built. You mentioned the Koch brothers' outreach to Latino groups. The Koch brothers have also partnered with Center for American Progress and others on a new criminal justice initiative. There's Right on Crime. There are people, who wouldn't necessarily be coming together on something like entitlements, but on the role of government in policing and sentencing and all these things. There are real and emerging opportunities. And one I would say that, it's something I can speak a whole lot to. I mean, there are some sort of different colleagues of mine are working on, except, I have some work in the felony disenfranchisement space, but I would urge folks to check out sort of the things that are out there. There are a number of organizations that are working on that for those that are interested, in, including some of my colleagues at the Brennan Center.
Thank you, Tomas. We have time for one last question.
In order to vote, I believe it's extremely tied to love of country, pride of the United States of America, and that in your individual household, your mother and father are perhaps serving as local committee persons on the Republican or Democratic or whatever else party, and they are your role model from the cradle to the grave. What could we do so that in each Latino household here in this sacred United States of America, the mothers and the fathers there participated in politics in their local level so that their sons and daughters could have that role model and then love the United States of America and also wish to serve America through politics perhaps, but basically hold voting most dear. Thank you.
You put too many different things together in one pot, I think. I don't think there's any doubt that Latinos, whatever their status, overwhelmingly are very positive toward the U.S. I don't know what the word love means, but they are not politically tied to their home country. They are culturally tied to the symbols of their home country. Enchiladas. I'm tied to enchiladas. Right? That doesn't mean I'm a Mexican. I'm not. I'm a Mexican American. I go to Mexico a lot. I know Mexico intimately. I'm an American, no doubt about it. So one can be cultural. We ought not to confuse cultural connection with political relations. the critics of Latinos blend those and say, you like enchiladas? You must be anti-US. I'm being cute, but I'm really not being cute. Okay? So the second point is, studies have shown that Latina mothers, when they are not having to work, but a lot of them do, are more engaged in school level issues than Anglo mothers. So they're already politically engaged, but it's in an arena that's prime. My kids, I want my, we struggled like hell to get across that river or come out of Guatemala for my kids to have a better life. And I'm going to work for that. I'm committed to that. Now that's very political. It's also very American. There's no incompatibility. So, on the other, one additional dimension, as I know all of you must know, I still think this is the case. I haven't seen new numbers. On a per capita basis, Mexican Americans have the highest proportion of Congress of Medal of Honor winners of any American soldier group. So I find it hard to think about them as not giving. I don't know what else you can give, or what more you can give. The dilemma becomes having them understand that voting is on the same par, on the same plane with that other stuff. That's hard. A lot of Anglos don't do that. We are an embarrassment internationally about our level to vote. But there are structural factors. We vote on Tuesday. Why the hell do we vote on Tuesday? Because the Pilgrims did? I mean, why do we vote on Tuesday? Can anybody give me a good reason for voting on Tuesday? How about making it a holiday? You don't have to vote, but make it easy to do. You talk about registration, same-day registration. Why can't we do that? There's corruption. We never found it. Oregon's done it. Minnesota's never found corruption. But the possibility exists. That's the question of how many angels dance on the head of a pin. We created limbo from that, for God's sake. You theologians, I'm sure, understand. So, getting people to link voting to these other primary commitments in which they engage and give to. That's a magic. And there aren't many people who are able to perform that trick. It's hard. I gave up community organizing after 2 sessions. I said, I don't have the guts or the strength to do this. So I went off to be an academic.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to all of our panelists tonight. It's been an incredibly interesting and entertaining and has given us a lot of food for thought. Thank you, Tomas, Maria, and Professor de la Garza, and thank you, everyone. Have a good night.